All right, good morning, students. Today's lesson is all about analyzing the sources of water pollution. Lots of examples today, especially some local examples. Many of us, live in the Little Neck Douglaston area, and we're very close to Little Neck Bay. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Lots of good examples today. Just a quick review about what pollution is, or what a pollutant is. A pollutant is any substance that contaminates the environment, air, water, and soil, or all places where it collects. Today our focus is water. Okay. Another reminder about point source pollution. Point source comes from a single location. So like for instance with water pollution, this is an example of a point source. It's a pipe that's leading directly into a waterway. You can see this gunk coming out. That's point source. Non-point source would be, for instance, every time a car hits the brake, for instance, your parents are in the car and they hit the brake, some of the brake pad actually will start to kind of shave itself off and they have to be replaced eventually. All of those brake shavings, actually, these kind of micro, shavings, actually get deposited onto the asphalt of the road. And when it rains, all of that brake pad material washes off into local waterways. Another source of pollution. That's an example of non-point source pollution because it's coming from every roadway everywhere, so it can't be isolated. All right, there are three main water sources on Earth: surface water, ocean water, and groundwater. Ocean water makes up 97% of all the water on the Earth. Surface waters and groundwater make up for groundwater is about 0.3%. Surface waters are even less. The other water on Earth, like the other 2%, is found in glaciers. That's frozen water. We can't access that. So in terms of like pollution, we're looking at oceans, we're looking at surface water, and we're looking at groundwater. Groundwater being the most important to us because that's where our water comes from. Our drinking water comes from. So surface water pollution. Here's a big one: pesticides and fertilizers. So pesticides and fertilizers, there's no doubt that in our area, people use pesticides and fertilizers to keep pests away, to make their plants grow better. Unfortunately, when it rains, all of that storm water, all that rainwater will wash away the pesticides, wash away the fertilizers, and they go into local streams and rivers. What that does is it kills insects, or it disrupts insects, and that disrupts the food chain. So you can see here where an insect is. An insect is towards the bottom of a food chain. So if the insects get affected, that will affect the organisms going up higher. Also, you can get heavy metals, lead, chromium, other types of heavy metals that can build up in fish and shellfish. I'm sure you've heard of mercury, maybe in salmon or other fish. They say you shouldn't eat a lot of fish, all the time. Like for instance, sushi, you shouldn't have sushi every single day. That's not very healthy because of mercury that's inside of the fish. That all comes from pollution. Here is a real life example of the Long Island Sound, and what it's showing here is something called hypoxic conditions. Hypoxic conditions are basically conditions where the oxygen in the water is at a very, very low level. And if there's low oxygen or low dissolved oxygen in the water, that means that fish they can't breathe. So this is a map showing the percent of hypoxic years from 1991 to 2011. And you can see right where we live. And just to give you, kind of a reference of where we live, we're right around here. Actually, hold on a second. No, I'm totally lying. We are not over there. We are over here. This is Great Neck, Port Washington, Manhasset area. So we are in the waters that are in the red. So we have a lot of hypoxic conditions. It's almost all the time. It's 90 to 100% of the time hypoxic. That's very, very bad. So you definitely do not want to go fishing in those waters. I know I was just over by Little Neck Bay and I was looking at some signs there, and some of the signs said, hey, don't do any shellfishing here. Don't pull any clams or shellfish out of the water. They are contaminated. This is not an official site to collect for clams, to eat. If you look out on Long Island Sound in the blue area, the water is much, much healthier, and it's safe to fish and do whatever out there. It's the water is much, much cleaner, and that makes sense because you have a lot of influx from the Atlantic Ocean that's kind of cleaning it out. But deep here on Long Island Sound, going into the bay, the water is not good there. So, okay, going along with that, algal blooms. When you have a lot of fertilizer, a lot of nitrogen entering the waters, you get a bloom of algae. And one thing that algae does, just like before I was saying with the low oxygen, the algae eats up all the oxygen in the water, creates hypoxic conditions, low oxygen conditions, and all the fish die. So what you can get are these fish kills, and they wash up on shore by the tens of thousands. It's really, really nasty. It has to be cleaned up because they'll start to rot and stuff. So algal blooms can kill fish and other sea life as oxygen is pulled out of the water. And Long Island is famous for these. Going back to Long Island Sound, the local Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, and the Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, they actually give grades to waterways. You could actually look up the grade, what letter grade any waterway gets. And unfortunately, right where we live, you can see that the water is an F. So Little Neck Bay is right in here. This is the Little Neck Bay area. Actually, right here, we are in the F territory. So the water quality is the lowest possible. Even near Lloyd Neck, going out in Long Island, it's still very, very low quality water. The only higher quality water is out near where the Atlantic Ocean is. You get into A quality water, meaning it's safe to fish, things like that. So where we are, we really have to clean up our water. All right, now transferring over to ocean water pollution sources. One thing to know is that all rivers and streams enter the water, no matter what. So any kind of industrial waste from like a sewage treatment plant, a place where all of our, water from flushing the toilet, or when we take a shower, when we, use a dishwasher, all of that water will go through, at least in our area, it goes through a treatment plant. It gets treated to attempt to pull out as much of that nastiness as possible before it exits, before it's released into the oceans. Unfortunately, we can't do everything. We do the best we can, but it can't all be pulled out. All the pollution can't be pulled out. Also, factories just release, factories have laws that they abide by. They can only release so many pollution, so much pollution into the area, but they still can do it. Ocean pollution could also include oil spills. There was that really famous oil spill, the BP oil spill. Some of you were probably very, very young. That happened. Very, very young, actually. That happened in 2009, I want to say. I just started working after college, so a lot of you were very, very young. You wouldn't remember that. But these are some of the pictures that came out of that. Really horrible, and it really devastated the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, plastics. Plastic is something that we're actively trying to reduce. That new laws are now in effect where we can't use single plastic bags, drinking straws, but that's just the beginning, right? That's just the beginning. So plastics actually have a way of reaching all parts of the ocean, and they'll float out there forever. They won't break down. Whales will eat them. Fish will eat them. Dolphins will eat it. It'll build up in their stomach. So that's really not good. And also it washes up on distant shores. So when you pollute, when a plastic bag, when a bottle ends up in the ocean, it will travel all throughout the ocean and reach a distant shore. And here's the last one, and probably the one that affects us the most, is groundwater pollution. So two main sources for groundwater pollution is landfills. Landfills do their best. And what is a landfill? A landfill is a place where we put all of our garbage. A lot of our garbage that's not burned. It's actually just buried in the ground. So we bury it, and what can happen is when it rains, the rainwater will push its way through the landfill, and in some cases can exit the landfill and move into a groundwater source. That could be a huge problem for people that rely on their groundwater. So the contaminated groundwater will go into their water well, and they will shower, bathe, wash, cook with it, and they may not realize. In some cases, they will realize because it'll smell really bad, and that's when a lawsuit happens. It gets very messy. Also, gasoline tank leaks. Same thing. A gasoline tank, any gas station you go to, there are tanks underneath the ground. Those tanks can hold upwards of 15,000 gallons of gasoline. And what can happen is, here's a cool picture of that. This is an underground storage tank. And what can happen is it can leak. And the leak, it doesn't matter how small the leak is. It could be a big or a small leak. It'll leak, and it will travel down through the soil, and it will kind of sit on top of the water, but some of it will actually dissolve into the water table, into the groundwater, and you can actually have vapors. That gasoline smell can travel up through the soil. If someone is drinking from that well, from that groundwater source, that's contaminated. They can't drink from there anymore. So yeah, gasoline stations are actually a huge source of pollution in our environment. For New York City, we don't have to worry about that so much because all of our water comes from upstate New York, and it's protected water sources, so we're generally okay. But out on Long Island, when you go all the way out to Suffolk County, there are some people that are still drinking from local groundwater. And that groundwater is vulnerable to things like this, as well as other sources of pollution. So yeah, it's actually quite a big problem. All right, that's today's lesson. There's a Google form. Make sure you fill it out. And for right now, all assignments will be due at 2:20 instead of the 9 o'clock.